The emergency room at County General was in its usual state of controlled chaos when I walked through the automatic doors for my first shift. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their sterile glow across the linoleum floors that had been scrubbed so many times they'd lost their original sheen years ago. I clutched my bag a little tighter, feeling the weight of my stethoscope inside it, and made my way toward the staff locker room. I was nervous, I'll admit. First days are always nerve-wracking, but this one felt different. This wasn't just a new job. It was a completely new life. After 12 years in the military, I was starting over as a civilian nurse, and the transition felt more jarring than I'd anticipated. The locker room was already occupied when I entered. 3 nurses stood near the benches, mid-conversation, their scrubs crisp and their name badges gleaming under the lights. They glanced up as I entered, their eyes scanning me with that particular mixture of curiosity and assessment that healthcare workers reserve for newcomers. "New hire?" one of them asked. She was tall, blonde, probably in her late 20s, with perfectly manicured nails that somehow survived constant hand-washing. Her name badge read, Ashley. "Yes," I replied, offering a smile. "First day, I'm Sam." "Welcome to the circus," another one chimed in, a shorter brunette named Melissa. "Fair warning, it gets pretty wild around here, especially on weekends. Hope you can handle the pressure." "I think I'll manage," I said quietly, opening my assigned locker and pulling out the dark blue scrubs that had been left for me. That's when I heard the first snicker. I turned slightly to see Ashley whispering something to Melissa, both of them glancing in my direction. The third nurse, an older woman named Patricia, at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Something funny?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Ashley shrugged, not bothering to hide her smirk. "No offense, but you look a little old to be just starting out as a nurse. Career change? Couldn't hack it in your previous job?" I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Something like that." "Well, heads up," Melissa added, her voice dripping with condescension. "This isn't some cushy office job. People's lives are on the line here. You need to be sharp, fast, and tough. Not everyone can cut it." I simply nodded and continued changing into my scrubs, refusing to engage. I'd dealt with far worse than mean girls in a locker room. The military had taught me many things, and one of them was how to choose my battles. Over the next few hours, their passive-aggressive behavior continued. During our orientation meeting with the charge nurse, Ashley made a point of questioning whether I'd be able to keep up with the physical demands of the job. When we were assigned to shadow different nurses, Melissa loudly wondered if I'd ever even started an IV before. "I'm sure she's done plenty," Patricia finally said, speaking up for the first time. "Let's give her a chance before we write her off, okay?" But Ashley and Melissa weren't interested in giving me a chance. To them, I was an outsider, an older newcomer who didn't fit their idea of what a new nurse should be, and they seemed determined to make sure I knew it. By lunchtime, I was ready for a break from their commentary. I found a quiet corner in the staff cafeteria and pulled out the sandwich I'd packed from home. The cafeteria was bustling with doctors, nurses, technicians, and administrative staff, all grabbing quick meals before diving back into their shifts. I was halfway through my sandwich when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Well, I'll be damned, Major Reynolds." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. That voice. I knew that voice. Slowly, I turned around and found myself face to face with someone I never expected to see here. Lieutenant Colonel David Morrison, my former commanding officer. He stood there in civilian clothes, jeans and a polo shirt, with the same authoritative presence he'd always had, even without the uniform. His hair had a bit more gray at the temples than I remembered, but his eyes were just as sharp and assessing as they'd been when he'd led our medical unit in Afghanistan. "Colonel Morrison," I said, standing up quickly. "Old habits die hard. What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he said, breaking into a wide grin. "Last I heard, you were stationed in Germany. What brings you to County General?" "Retired last year," I explained. "Decided to put my nursing experience to use stateside. What about you?" "Consulting work for the VA," he said. "I'm here today meeting with hospital administration about a partnership program. But forget about me. Major, it's incredible to see you. How's civilian life treating you?" Before I could answer, I noticed we'd attracted attention. Several staff members were glancing our way, including Ashley and Melissa, who sat 2 tables over. They'd stopped their conversation entirely, watching us with undisguised curiosity. "It's an adjustment," I admitted. "Different pace, different protocols. But I'm managing. Morrison nodded knowingly. I bet you are. You were one of the finest nurses I ever had the privilege of commanding. How many lives did you save overseas? Must be in the hundreds. I felt my cheeks warm. I was just doing my job, sir. Major, you were exceptional at your job, he corrected. The number of critical casualties you stabilized under fire, the way you trained the younger medics, your leadership during that field hospital attack in Kandahar. Reynolds, you were decorated multiple times for a reason. The cafeteria had gotten noticeably quieter. More people were listening now, though pretending not to. Morrison glanced around, seeming to notice our audience for the first time. When his eyes landed on my scrubs, understanding dawned on his face. Wait, are you working here at County General? Started today, actually. His eyebrows shot up. Today? Your first day and nobody told me we had a decorated military nurse joining the staff? He shook his head in disbelief. What department? Emergency. Of course, he said, grinning. Where else would you be? You always did thrive in high-pressure situations. He paused, studying me more carefully. They treating you well here, Major? I hesitated, glancing briefly toward Ashley and Melissa. Morrison caught the look. I see, he said quietly, his expression hardening slightly. Well, that's disappointing. People should know better. Before I could respond, he straightened up, and suddenly the casual, friendly demeanor shifted into something I recognized immediately. Command presence. This was the colonel I'd served under, the leader who could silence a room with a look and inspire unwavering loyalty with his words. Excuse me, he said, his voice cutting through the cafeteria chatter. Could I have everyone's attention for just a moment? The room fell silent. Even the doctors looked up from their charts. Morrison turned to me, and then, to my absolute shock and horror, he came to attention and rendered a crisp military salute. Major Samantha Reynolds, he said, his voice ringing out clear and formal. It is an honor to see you again. I stood there, frozen, acutely aware of every eye in the cafeteria on us. Years of training kicked in, and I returned the salute reflexively, even though we were both in civilian clothes and technically no longer required to observe such protocols. Sir, I managed to say. Morrison dropped his salute and turned to address the room. For those of you who don't know, you have the privilege of working alongside one of the finest combat nurses this country has ever produced. Major Reynolds served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. She ran a forward surgical team under constant threat of attack, saved countless lives under fire, and trained an entire generation of military medics. He paused, letting that sink in. She was awarded the Bronze Star for valor after she remained in a partially collapsed field hospital during a Taliban attack, refusing to evacuate until every single patient under her care was safely transported. She worked for 18 hours straight, treating wounded soldiers while mortar rounds fell around her position. I wanted to disappear. This wasn't why I'd come here. I'd wanted to leave the military behind, to just be a nurse helping people without the weight of ranks and medals and past heroics. But Morrison wasn't finished. She also received the Meritorious Service Medal, the Army Commendation Medal with Valor Device, and the Combat Medical Badge. She held the rank of major before her retirement, supervising entire medical units and making life and death decisions on a daily basis. He looked around the room. So when you see her in those scrubs, I hope you'll remember that she's forgotten more about emergency medicine than most people will ever learn. The silence in the cafeteria was deafening. Morrison turned back to me, his expression softening. I didn't mean to embarrass you, Sam. I know you never liked the spotlight, but these people should know who you are and what you've accomplished. Thank you, sir, I said quietly, though I'd prefer to be judged by my work here, not my past. As you should be, he agreed. But there's nothing wrong with people understanding your capabilities from the outset. He glanced meaningfully toward where Ashley and Melissa sat, both looking pale and stunned. It tends to prevent unfortunate misunderstandings. We talked for a few more minutes before Morrison had to leave for his meeting. As he walked away, the cafeteria slowly came back to life, but the atmosphere had completely changed. People were looking at me differently now, with respect, curiosity, even a bit of awe. I sat back down to finish my sandwich, trying to ignore the stares. Patricia, the older nurse from the locker room, approached my table. May I sit? She asked. I nodded. I want to apologize, she said once she'd settled into the chair across from me. I should have shut down Ashley and Melissa's behavior earlier. It was unprofessional and uncalled for. It's fine, I said, though we both knew it wasn't really. It's not fine, Patricia insisted. And for what it's worth, I'm a Navy vet myself. 8 years as a corpsman. I should have recognized a fellow service member. She extended her hand. Thank you for your service and welcome to County General. The real welcome, not the hazing you got this morning. I shook her hand, grateful for her honesty. The rest of my shift was markedly different from the morning. Word had spread quickly about Morrison's cafeteria announcement, and suddenly everyone wanted to introduce themselves, to hear stories, to ask questions. The attending physician in the ER, Dr. Chen, pulled me aside to tell me that his father had been an Army medic in Vietnam, and that he had immense respect for military medical personnel. As for Ashley and Melissa, they kept their distance. I caught them whispering together a few times, shooting glances in my direction, but the mocking smirks were gone. In their place was something that looked suspiciously like embarrassment. Around hour 6 of my shift, we got our first major trauma, a multi-car accident on the interstate with 5 patients incoming. The ER exploded into coordinated chaos, with teams assembling, trauma bays being prepped, and Dr. Chen barking orders. I fell into the rhythm automatically. This was familiar territory. The adrenaline, the urgency, the need to prioritize and act decisively. It was all second nature. When the first patient arrived, a young man with a tension pneumothorax and multiple fractures, I was right there, assisting Dr. Chen with the chest decompression, calling out vitals, anticipating what was needed before anyone had to ask. Excellent work, Reynolds, Dr. Chen said as we stabilized the patient for surgery. You weren't kidding about your experience. Over the next 2 hours, we worked through all 5 patients. 1 required emergency surgery. 2 needed ICU admission. The other 2 were stabilized and admitted for observation. It was exhausting, intense work, but it was also exhilarating. This was why I'd become a nurse in the first place, to help people in their darkest moments, to be the calm in the storm. When the last patient was wheeled up to surgery, Dr. Chen gathered the team. Outstanding work, everyone, he said. Special recognition to Reynolds, who jumped in like she'd been working here for years. That's the kind of skill and composure we need in this ER. Ashley, who'd been part of the team, said nothing, but I saw her exchange a look with Melissa. Later, as I was charting in the nurses' station, Ashley approached. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. Hey, she said. Can we talk? I looked up from my computer. Sure. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. I owe you an apology. The way Melissa and I acted this morning, it was completely out of line. We made assumptions, and we were cruel. I'm sorry. I studied her for a moment. She looked genuinely contrite. Apology accepted, I said. We all have bad days. It wasn't just a bad day, she admitted. We've been here for a few years, and sometimes we get territorial about new staff, especially nurses who come from different backgrounds. It's not an excuse, but I wanted you to know it wasn't personal. We didn't know anything about you. And if you had known about my military service, you wouldn't have been so dismissive? I asked. She had the grace to look ashamed. Probably not. That's something you might want to think about, I said gently. Everyone has a story. Everyone brings something valuable to the table. You don't know what someone has been through or what they're capable of until you give them a chance. You're right, Ashley said. I'll try to do better. That's all any of us can do. She nodded and walked away, leaving me to my charting. The rest of the shift passed without incident. By the time I changed back into my street clothes and headed out to my car, I was exhausted, but satisfied. It had been a roller coaster of a first day, but I'd proven, to myself and to others, that I belonged here. As I drove home through the dark streets, I thought about Morrison's unexpected appearance and his very public acknowledgement of my service. Part of me was still embarrassed by the attention, but another part, the part that had spent 12 years in uniform, serving my country, felt validated. I'd spent so much time trying to leave the military behind to start fresh without the weight of my past, that I'd forgotten something important. My experiences had shaped me into the nurse I was. The skills I'd developed, the resilience I'd built, the lives I'd saved. Those things were part of me, whether I wore scrubs or fatigues. I didn't need to hide from my past. I just needed to let my present work speak for itself. And on my first day at County General, I think I'd done exactly that.